We're proud to support the craft of journalism. UBS brings you the latest news from around the world with The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Be part of an international network that brings together leading insights, research, and technology across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs, with you at the center of it all. UBS. Advice is our craft.
You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 28th of August 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A very warm welcome to today's programme. Coming up.
A close call in the Netherlands, but Dutch politics has become a ship without a rudder.
The Dutch Prime Minister survives a no-confidence vote. We'll have the latest from the Netherlands on another difficult chapter in the country's politics. We'll also examine similar woes in France as their Prime Minister puts himself up for a vote of confidence next month. Also ahead, in the next 60 minutes, Donald Trump fires one of the heads of the Fed. She fights back, but does she stand a chance? And what happens when you remove the independent voices? Plus,
this book was meant to be the book that accompanied the exhibition, but I don't know. We got lost and we just didn't get it finished in time.
The legendary photographer Bruce Weber tells us about how his latest book may be his most personal yet. Plus the papers and the culture news too. That's all coming up on The Globalist, live from London. First, a quick summary of what else we're looking at in the news. All members of the UN Security Council, except the United States, have called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and urged Israel to lift sanctions on aid. President Trump has chaired a meeting in Washington to discuss post-war plans for Gaza, with no Israeli or Palestinian representatives at the meeting. And the German defence company Rheinmetall has opened Europe's largest munitions plant. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on these stories. But first, the Dutch Prime Minister Dick Seehoff and his cabinet survived a no-confidence vote last night. The crisis had come about after the collapse of the caretaker government earlier this summer. Well, Stefan de Vries is European Affairs correspondent for Euronews and BNR News Radio, joining us now from The Hague. Good morning, Stefan.
Good morning, Emma.
So what happened to Mr. Seehoff last night?
Well, he actually faced a no-confidence vote in Parliament, but that was actually just a detail because the government collapsed beginning of June on the topic of asylum seekers. So there was already a caretaker government in place, but the caretaker government also collapsed, something that the Dutch didn't know that could happen. It's a first time in history that another party walks out of a caretaker government. And that means that the government is currently composed of only two small parties, the VVD and the BBD, with only 32 of the 150 seats in parliament. So a very, very small minority. And Dick Seehoff, a civil servant without any political experience, is now in charge of this very small caretaker cabinet. In Dutch, they call it a rump cabinet, as if a whole body has been dismembered and only the rump is still there. But that's what happened last night. The parliament considered sending away even this small caretaker cabinet, but in the end, they decided not to.
Where does this tell us more about this rump cabinet and what remains? It's an astonishing image that you described there, but by all accounts, this attempt to unseat Mr. Seehoff and his cabinet was unsuccessful by a very large margin. This was a convincing win for the Prime Minister.
Well, that's one way to put it. The other way is, of course, the reality, political reality. There are general elections in 2 months from now on the 29th of October. And that means that the whole parliament and the government will take leave a month before the election. So that is in 5 weeks. The parliament was basically pragmatic and chose the current rump cabinet to let it in place for another 5 weeks, because that's what we're talking about. And that means that in those 5 weeks, no real decisions will be taken in the run-up to the elections. The campaign will start very soon. So it was a very pragmatic decision by the Dutch parliament, also by the opposition, not to send away Dick Schoof, because then the Dutch would have to find a new prime minister who would only stay in place for a few more weeks. So it is really an unprecedented situation in Dutch political history that there is basically no government anymore.
And the difficulty is that the government has continued in whatever form to not agree on anything since around about June, hasn't it? Because this all started in June with, as you say, an argument about immigrants. The thing that prompted this latest collapse of the government had to do with the Netherlands' approach to Gaza. So it does beg the question, when is a caretaker government not a caretaker government? Because it's unable to actually do what it is supposed to do, which is to be pragmatic.
Exactly. Well, the problem with this specific government is that it started its job July last year, after almost a year of negotiations to try to form a government after the previous elections. And from the beginning, this was a club of people who didn't trust each other, who had very different views on the world, who were arguing all the time. They were fighting on Twitter, in TV talk shows. So from the beginning, it was a completely unable cabinet to do anything. So it sounds cynical, but actually it doesn't change a lot, because the Dutch have been coping with the government of Prime Minister Dick Schoof for almost over a year now, and in that year nothing really happened. The only thing that happened was quarrels, infighting in political parties, the opposition being sidestepped, and so this is the current political situation in the Netherlands. There is no government, and there has been no government for almost, more than a year now. And strangely enough, it doesn't really seem to make a difference, because the economy is doing pretty well. There's no unemployment, but of course there are many problems to tackle. For instance, climate change, but also the incredible shortage on the job market. There's a huge housing crisis. So they're all very pressing issues that have not been tackled by the government for more than a year now. So this situation, it sounds very grotesque, but it is a consequence of the decisions of the four parties to start a coalition last year in the first place.
So what damage do you think such an absence of government could do? Because the problems that you have just outlined are not ones that are going to go away.
No, all the parties agree that the huge problems the country is facing have to be tackled, but that's the only thing that they agree on. How these problems should be solved is a matter of the campaign language that is starting right now for the upcoming elections in October. But they already had elections 2 years ago, and the problems were the same. So basically, for 2 years, Dutch politics is completely paralyzed. The problems are increasing, and there's nobody taking care of the situation. And of course, this leads to a huge drop in confidence in politics. Yesterday, the broadcaster RTL News found in an opinion poll that only 4% of the Dutch people still have confidence in politics. So there's a huge trust issue, and it will be a gigantic task of the candidates of the political parties in the upcoming 2 months to gain back that trust, because otherwise it will very be possible that very few people will actually take to the polls in October, basically weakening even more the faith in politics and the faith in the Dutch parliament and government.
Are you surprised by this collapse in faith in politics, given the fact that before all this started, Mark Rutte was your prime minister for 14 years and enjoyed a stability that most European leaders would absolutely envy?
Yes, that's true. The problem is that Mark Rutte led the country almost isolated, but he was very one of his biggest talents, maybe his only talent, that he is able to get all different parties at the table, trying to get all the different opinions together and find a compromise. That was something that he was excellent in. The problem is that he led the party for so long that there was actually nobody to succeed him. The current party leader, Dylan Yezilgus, has been very heavily criticized because she's very aggressive on Twitter, for instance, in social media. And she also has a very harsh stance when it comes to the support of Israel. That was actually the matter where the government last week collapsed on. The foreign minister, Casper Veldkamp, he resigned last Friday because the parties couldn't agree on tougher sanctions against Israel. Now, the party leader of the VVD, Dylan Yezilkus, so the successor of Mark Rutte, she has been very much in favor of the Israel, and she's not able to make any coalitions. So yeah, Rutte left, and basically he said, "Well, the country is now yours. I'm going to Brussels to NATO, and you can take care of it." But the problem is, nobody can actually, and that has led to this incredible unstable situation in Dutch politics. It's basically it would be funny if it wouldn't be a very serious matter, but it gives you an image of how chaotic Dutch politics has become over the past few years.
Briefly, October the 29th is when the elections happen. Is this going to sort itself out?
Not at all, because in the party, in the opinion polls, you see a couple of parties leading. Still, Geert Wilders' extreme right party, PVV, it will end up first, according to the current opinion polls. Then the second party will be the Green Left and the Socialists. They have now a joint party. And then the problem is that there will be at least 15 to 20 parties in parliament. It will be very hard to form a coalition because the VVD now has a real right-wing rhetoric and already said that they will exclude governing with the socialists. So that means that we will probably end up with a coalition of at least 4 or 5 different political parties, and you can only imagine the mess that will give. So I don't see this situation change anytime soon in the Netherlands.
Stefan de Vries in The Hague, thank you so much for joining us on The Globalist. Well, let's turn to another European government in crisis. The French Prime Minister, François Bayrou, has called a vote of confidence, and unlike what we've just seen in the Netherlands, he could be toppled and take the government with him. And if he loses, France may get an unprecedented 5th head of government in just 20 months. Well, I'm joined now from Paris by Florence Biedermann, who's journalist and political analyst and former AFP chief editor. Good morning, Florence.
Good morning, Emma.
Good to have you with us. So just listening to what was happening in the Netherlands, that's almost like a still mill pond compared with what's happening in France.
Yeah, but it's kind of a bit of the same, you know. I mean, actually, François Bayrou, the prime minister, is kind of making a gamble, but a gamble he already seems to have lost by calling for this confidence vote on the 8th of September. He's quite unpopular. He knows that his austerity budget to tackle France's ballooning deficit is very unpopular, and it would be very difficult for him to have the parliament voting for it. So he tries to force the hand of the MPs by saying, okay, before we even discuss this budget, do you agree on the fact that we should have that kind of budget? And well, I mean, it seems that already all the far right, far left, moderate left parties declared that they would not vote the confidence, which means it's mathematic. He is probably going to fall on the 8th of September.
And he's the latest French Prime Minister given almost an impossible job by Emmanuel Macron, hasn't he? I mean, you mentioned the austerity budget. And in this particular budget, he also wants to kill off 2 public holidays, which the French are not going to take to very easily.
Yeah. Well, I know. I mean, it's a way to present it and to say the French are lazy and they don't want to lose their holidays. Yes, it's kind of symbolic, but there are lots of other measures, like, for example, cutting in the reimbursement of medication, freezing the pensions. You know, it's not only the 2 days. It's a way to sum it up. And yes, you're right. I mean, still, French immediately protested and said, we don't want to lose our revenues. We don't want to lose those 2 days. But I would say there is more to it than this. And yes, as you said, the task is impossible since Emmanuel Macron convoked snap elections a year ago, which was a disastrous decision. He lost his majority. And now, I mean, every French prime minister, and even probably the next one, will have the same conundrum. How do you manage to govern when you have absolutely no majority? And how long is it going to take for the next government to fall?
How has this actually affected France itself, given the fact that we could have 5 heads of government in 20 months? And this is something that France has, to all intents and purposes, enjoyed a reasonably stable way of going about politics for quite a while now. But to find itself for at least a year in completely unknown territory, what effect does that have on France?
Well, I mean, France is in crisis. It is a political crisis. I mean, so far, its constitution allowed it to be governed by 2 big parties. It was either right or left. This has collapsed. I mean, the arrival of Emmanuel Macron on the political scene has kind of dynamited this kind of stable system. He created kind of a new center, taking people from the left and right and pretending he was neither right nor left. So now that the system is a bit in shambles, I mean, you can't really see how stability will now be possible. So the scenarios for the next future are, yes, Macron will most probably appoint a new prime minister. And then if the next government fails again, then there will be maybe another round of elections. One thing is sure, he said he would never resign. So this is a scenario that is not considered as probable. So what effect does it have? Well, you live in a country where, short-term decisions only are made. I mean, there is a political crisis. Plus now, there is also a social crisis because several parties, like the far left, and also some trade unions, launched an appeal to block the country symbolically on the 10th of September. That means just 2 days after. Probably there won't be any more government, but it's another way from all these forces to pile pressure on the political scene, and to say, we want to have our rights respected, etc. It's add another little bit to the crisis.
Finally, just a quick look at what could actually happen. There are calls for parliamentary elections, and at that point, the National Rally, Marine Le Pen's party, is being seen as a very, very strong contender.
Yes, a strong contender. But she has been sentenced to ineligibility for her embezzlement of European funds recently. So so far, she doesn't seem that she could be a candidate. Maybe there will be another justice decision, but you have to wait for this, and maybe it will confirm the first decision. So it makes it even less probable that they could be elected, but who knows?
Florence Biedermann in Paris, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. Still to come on today's programme.
People are paying too high an interest rate. That's the only problem with housing. We have to get the rates down a little bit.
So why does Donald Trump believe the best way to fix America's problems is to fire the experts? Stay with us on The Globalist.
Craft is a matter of perspective, a unique outlook, an obsessive attention to detail. With UBS House View, you get the big picture in bite-sized articles, delivered daily and curated by over 200 globally connected, locally active analysts, all focused on identifying the latest investment opportunities and market risks to help you achieve your financial goals. UBS, banking is our craft.
Let's continue with today's newspapers. Joining me is Navina Kotor, who's Monocle's Nairobi correspondent. Very good morning to you, Navina. How are things? I haven't spoken to you for ages, so you must bring me up to date with everything that's happening in Nairobi.
Well, I think the big announcement here has been somewhat expected, that the activist Boniface Mwangi is going to run for president in 2027. It feels very, very early, but several people here have announced that they're going to run as independent candidates for the election. That's another 2 years away, to challenge President Ruto, who's also planning to run. Mwangi is the guy who I think is largely credited with mobilizing these protests that we've seen over the last 1.5 years. He launched his campaign yesterday saying that the country is on the verge of becoming a failed state. And I think we have to see if the campaign picks up or if he eventually decides to merge with other independent candidates.
Tell me what he does to differentiate from the current administration. William Ruto also running, as you said. But what is it about Mwangi that makes him different?
I think what does, part of his appeal is that he has these street credentials of having mobilized, of having taken part in demonstrations, of having confronted the police. He faced terrorism charges. He also attended the trial of political opponents in Tanzania. So he's a very prominent opposition candidate. In terms of policies, I think actually there is very little that we know so far. The country has various issues that whoever becomes president in 2 years will have to address. One is the burden of debt that the country has accumulated abroad as well as internally, and the question of how to address it. The other question remains how to generate jobs so that people feel more invested in the economy, and how to address issues like corruption. So I think when it comes to policy, there has been very little so far, but I guess he has another 2 years to work on it.
And this is going to be a very, very long road to 2027.
Yes, very long road. I mean, we've seen the former head of the Constitutional Court, David Moraga, announcing his campaign. He's very active, for someone who's actually retired, very active on social media, running quite funny social media campaigns with Instagram chefs, and he's traveling a lot abroad. And then we've seen a senator who's also announced he's going to run. So it's a very long road, but I think it shows how determined a lot of people here are to prevent a second term of President Ruto running the country.
OK, let's move on to another story that you wanted to draw our attention to, which is the success story, which is now of solar panels in Africa supplied by the Chinese.
Yes, this is a report that looks at the supply of solar panels by China to Africa, and it has seen a sort of 60% spike in imports across the continent, according to this new analysis over the last year. For example, it has great examples in, this is working in Nigeria, a country that actually has access to fuel, but also in countries like Sierra Leone. Over the last 12 months, the solar panels that were installed have generated 61% of the total reported electricity generation. So I think that's really significant. And I think it shows that after the impact we have seen of the war between Ukraine and Russia impacting the cost of fuel, that countries are really investing in more sustainable methods of generating electricity to kind of become a bit more independent of global fuel prices and import issues that exist.
And will this change things permanently?
I think we're really seeing something that is a movement. It's building momentum. I think here in Kenya, it's very visible. You have a shift towards electric vehicles, especially it starts with kind of motorbikes, but you also have electricity generation in private households. You have hotels that buying electric vehicles and generating electricity with solar panels. And I think it is a sort of a chance that a lot of African countries are seeing to make a shift, to make a jump, and to build a more sustainable electricity grid. And the Chinese are obviously helping them by making it, I think, price-wise more accessible as well.
Let's move on to Niger. Again, a question of power and who controls the power.
Yes, we talk about, what's happening in the Sahel and the influence the West or France has lost in the Sahel. That's Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, and the growing influence of Russia quite often on this slot. The Russian government is sort of suggesting that they are prepared to build the first nuclear power project in West Africa. Now, Niger has historically exported uranium to France. And this they want to change. They want to build this power plant. They want to use the uranium for power generation, but also for medical applications. The Russian state is promising to kind of build or train local expertise under a cooperation agreement that has already been signed. I think we need to see whether this actually happens, but I think it also shows the kind of soft power game the Russian government is playing by sort of drawing on these insecurities that exist, the fact that this uranium has been exported for a long time, but the sense that the country has never benefited from it. And I think we have to see if this power plant is actually built.
And indeed, you have this question, a moment ago I was asking you about solar panels being brought in from China. Now we have Russia trying to get a stronghold on the uranium in Niger. There is that sense that the international world is very much sort of planting its hands in various countries to ensure that its grip, not just soft power, but hard power as well, is retained and indeed developed.
Yes, exactly. And I think we saw that because in the fact that the French nuclear group Orano was nationalized in June, which has now cleared the way for Russia to put itself forward as a new partner and for this agreement. And as you say, there is this sense that sort of geopolitics, energy, fuel is very kind of closely entangled. For a time, there was also an issue that there was very little international financing available for African countries to build anything other than solar and similar projects. So I think in this case, we just have to see, because it is going to be very expensive to build it. And it will be interesting to see where exactly they want to build it, whether this actually goes ahead. But the issue of power generation is a massive issue on the continent, and different countries are trying to kind of exert their influence by supporting governments to improve their electricity grid.
Let's head to Zanzibar now and port infrastructure. This is all about growth and development, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. It's all about infrastructure today, I'm afraid. I think it's also about the competition between Kenya and Tanzania when it comes to infrastructure. So Zanzibar is planning to spend $400 million to build a port infrastructure that will enable it to receive cargo ships directly from abroad without relying on Mombasa here in Kenya or Tanzania's Dar es Salaam port. Currently, Zanzibar doesn't receive cargo ships directly from abroad. They have to go via Mombasa or Dar es Salaam. The goods are offloaded, then reloaded, and then transported to Zanzibar. So that causes a lot of delays and frustration. But I think it also shows that the Tanzanian government is very keen on improving its port infrastructure as the economies on the coast, but also inland, are growing, to kind of position itself as a port that can basically deal with export as well as import to countries like Uganda, Burundi, and other countries in Central Africa as well. So there is already this port competition between Mombasa and Tanga, and I think we're going to see more competition in the coming years.
Navina Koto, Monocle's Nairobi correspondent, thank you so much for joining us on the line. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio. All members of the UN Security Council, except the US, have called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and urged Israel to lift sanctions on aid. The Council also said that the famine in Gaza was man-made and said the use of starvation as a weapon of war was prohibited under international humanitarian law. President Trump has chaired a meeting in Washington to discuss post-war plans for Gaza. The former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair and President's son-in-law Jared Kushner attended the talks, but it's understood there were no Israeli or Palestinian representatives at the meeting. And the German defence company Rheinmetall has opened Europe's largest munitions plant. The plant at Unterlüß in northern Germany says it'll be able to produce 350,000 artillery shells a year. The NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte said the plant will be crucial to European security and for helping Ukraine to fight its Russian invaders. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. Now a look at some of the other headlines we're following here. At Midori House, Monocle's newsletter editor Jack Simpson joins us now to tell us why there's been another diplomatic spat between Copenhagen and Washington.
Denmark has long been a dependable US ally. It is a country with wealth, a well-funded military, and a useful strategic position at the mouth of the Baltic Sea. But it has been another fraught week for the pair after a year defined by Washington's repeated calls for the absorption of Greenland, a Danish overseas territory. The latest episode in this tiff began on Friday when Danish Foreign Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen signed a memorandum of understanding with the Californian Governor Gavin Newsom. The deal, which promised cooperation on green initiatives and technology, would ordinarily seem like a savvy agreement between a rich European country and America's most dynamic state. But with Newsom emerging as one of the top Democratic leader challengers to Trump, it was perhaps always likely to irk the US president. The White House response came 3 days later, with the halting of the work of the $1.5 billion Revolution Wind project, a huge wind farm off Rhode Island that was aiming to provide power to 350,000 US homes from next year. The project is half-owned by Danish state energy company Ørsted, whose shares fell 16% on Monday. Coincidentally or not, the spat swung back yesterday when the Danish government summoned the US Embassy's top diplomat, Mark Stroh, to address concerns that US citizens with alleged links to Donald Trump had been conducting covert influence operations in Greenland to encourage secession from Denmark. It's the latest tit-for-tat exchange that's unravelling a 200-year-old friendship. But Europe and NATO are reliant on strong relations between these historic partners. The Pitterfoot space base in northwest Greenland acts as the bloc's early warning system for Arctic attacks. Should the diplomatic ructions continue, it puts the already strained transatlantic defence network at greater risk.
And our thanks to Monocle's newsletter editor Jack Simpson there. For more, sign up to our daily newsletter, the Monocle Minute. Just head to monocle.com/minute. This is A Globalist. The letter that was sent to Lisa Cook, the first African-American woman on the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, was brisk and it was brief. Dear Governor Cook, the document read, you are hereby removed from your position on the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve, effective immediately. Well, Lisa Cook has chosen to fight Donald Trump's attempts to remove her from what some argue is the world's most powerful economic institution, which is refusing to endorse a dramatic lowering of the interest rates in the United States. And in addition to this, in the last few hours, another senior American figure has been removed from post. This time, the White House has fired Susan Menares as director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. She's been pushed out because she refused to resign amid pressure to change vaccine policy. Well, trying to make sense of all this, and a story which is moving faster than we can keep up with, is Ash Bhardwaj, writer and broadcaster. Welcome back to the studio, Ash.
Good morning, Emma. Lovely to see you.
So could you, before we start saying, is there a pattern emerging? I think we know the answer to that already. Tell us what's happened to Susan Menares.
So Susan Menares, as you say, is the director of the CDC. So they oversee policy and guidance on how to prevent diseases happening, and that includes vaccine control and vaccine guidance. And it appears that she has had a conflict with the health secretary, Robert RFK Jr., and he is a vaccine skeptic, despite having used vaccines himself. And we're still trying to figure out what's going on here, because every couple of days there's a new firing by the Trump administration of a senior official, an advisor, and an expert in an area. And it seems to be that they're pushing back on people who don't let them get their way immediately, or who are offering advice that they don't necessarily want to hear. So he's they're going after Menarez, they've gone after Lisa Cook, and there's been a lot of intelligence officials that they've gone after as well. They recently fired General Cruz, who was the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, which basically gathers lots of different intelligence together. And that seems to have been more about the fact that it countered the Trump administration's narrative about the success of the Iran attacks. For Menarez, it seems that she's maybe, we don't know because we've not heard all the details yet, maybe holding up, as you say, these efforts to try and reduce vaccine advice and recommendations. And for Lisa Cook, it's because the Federal Reserve aren't lowering interest rates as fast as Trump wants them to.
And you sort of hit on the crucial point here when you talked about Cruz. The fact was that Lieutenant General Jeffrey Cruz had said that the US attacks on Iran's nuclear facilities had only put back the weapons program by a matter of months, which is obviously not what Donald Trump wanted to hear. And when you start to create your own narrative when you're in power, what effect does that have?
For intelligence advice and recommendation particularly, it doesn't really matter what you want to hear, it's what is. We saw the effect of this in 2022. So it appears that when Putin launched his full-scale invasion of Ukraine, he'd had advice from his intelligence experts and senior people in the military telling him the Russian army is ready, the Ukrainian army is not, and the Ukrainian people are going to welcome us when we try and invade. And all of those three things turned out to be incorrect. So he was getting duff advice, which led to him making a decision that led to an outcome that he didn't want. And the suggestion there is that people were afraid to give him the intelligence advice that was correct because they might get pushed back or pushed out of a window. And for what we're seeing with the Trump administration, the risk that they have is that if they stop experts and advisors giving them true information, even if it isn't what they want to hear, they'll end up making decisions that are bad and bad for the United States as well.
How much is this a throwback to the fact that Donald Trump on both occasions has been elected to power on a sort of an anti-establishment ticket? We will go into government and we will clear out the guys who are lying to you, the guys who are making you poorer, the guys who are making you lose your jobs. Is it a political decision for this, or is this just simply you don't make the king cross? I
wonder if there's maybe both things happening here, because we have heard about the way he reacts to people who don't give him things that he wants or give him advice that he doesn't like to hear. So some of it could just be a fit of pique. But there's another thing that's going on with this particular Trump administration. You may have heard of the unitary executive theory. So the idea is that all of the power should be invested in the president, and Congress, experts, even the Supreme Court shouldn't be able to get in the way because the people have elected the president and he should be able to get on to do his job. In the first Trump administration, there were people like General Mattis, even Rex Tillerson, who were giving Trump advice and recommendations that he didn't necessarily want to hear, and they would either be forced to resign or they would be fired. In this administration, the people he's got around him, he's spent the last 4 years between administrations building up a clique of people who are loyalists rather than experts. Pete Hegseth, who had been in the military, but he was a Fox host. He wasn't General Mattis, who was one of the most accomplished and senior generals in the US military. So part of it is trying to make sure that he can get his plans through and ensure that they're delivered. But in doing so, he might be making bad decisions.
And how much is this actually coming from Donald Trump himself? But as you say, he's surrounded himself by yes characters. And one wonders how much of an agenda they have, because there is that saying that, you know, the Donald Trump just believes the last person he's spoken to. That forms his agenda. Is Trump being played here?
So there's a group called the Heritage Foundation, which is a very accomplished and powerful political lobbying group that spent a long time putting people that support its positions into places of power. And they wrote much of the policy agenda for the Trump administration this time, and many members of that foundation are in positions of power. Is he really just a vehicle for them? I mean, maybe that's what you see in a lot of politics anyway. But Donald Trump does seem to have his own ideas. And I think when you start to see things like his negotiations with Russia, they're based on his advice from a guy called Steve Witkoff, who's a property expert, rather than being a Russia expert. And they're vulnerable. So there's areas where they really want to get their agenda through, and then there are areas where their lack of experience, the lack of expertise and lack of knowledge makes them vulnerable to being played.
Ash Bhardwaj, writer and broadcaster with me here in London. Thank you so much for joining me in the studio. You're listening to Monocle Radio. Now, the images of the photographer Bruce Weber are certainly some of the most powerful in pop culture. His highly stylised, often black and white images came to define much of American culture in the 80s, 90s and beyond. We need only think of the Calvin Klein underwear adverts, for example. Or for his new publication with Taschen, My Education, Weber showcases his most personal publication to date, revisiting themes and photographs that have shaped his work and life. And he spoke to radio's senior correspondent Fernando Augusto Pacheco, and he talked about how the book came out.
This book was meant to be the book that accompanied the exhibition. But I don't know, we got lost and we were hanging out, and I don't know, we just didn't get it finished in time for the exhibition. And so, and also, it was such an ongoing thing. And there were some other people I wanted to photograph or to write about. And so I was at the film festival. We were showing a film that I made at Lyon. And I went to the Lumière, a family called the Lumières, and they were some of the first photographers, doing amazing photographs. And they were a family all making pictures. And I always thought about my families that I've had with me, besides my own, who we would just take pictures, but it would be like a family affair, you know what I mean, amongst friends. The first time, when I was a kid, my dad was always taking pictures. He was a really good photographer. And years later, we had a show at the Whitney Museum where one wall was his and one wall was mine. And it was such a great experience. I wish he had been alive to see it. I think he would have been really proud of his pictures. I was really proud of his pictures too.
You write beautifully about your parents in the introduction of the book, how the relationship of your mom and dad was so beautiful, was moved by desire. I mean, not unlike some of your imagery, kind of, which always feels alive in a way. Were they a big inspiration for your work, photography work?
Yeah, I was like addicted to them, I mean, they were so wild. Maybe that's why I was so square as a kid, because
that's always the case.
My sister was very bohemian. I wasn't so bohemian maybe until I got to New York City. I was going to NYU Film School. My parents were very glamorous to me, and I remember my mom would leave me. They sent my sister to a Catholic school where she had all the girls in her class dye their hair platinum blonde, and just causing the nuns a lot of trouble. But I was left at home with a woman who took care of me, and she made grilled cheese sandwiches for me every night with tomato soup. And then she would go to sleep, and I would be up, looking at all my dad's books, and his books of painting, and seeing all these nude women. And then I would watch films I shouldn't be watching, like really old films that were classic American cinema, that were very wild, a lot of violence, things like that my parents would have never let me. But they were very passionate about life, My dad grew a great garden of tons of vegetables and flowers. And my uncle, my great uncle, he was in really great shape, and he'd run around and he'd just be exercising in the backyard. It was kind of like weird. It was almost a little bit like sort of that bohemian lifestyle, like in Northern California, I'd say, like in the 50s and 60s it was.
Oh, that sounds very exciting. And that's an interesting thing about, My Education, because it's not necessarily a straightforward retrospective. At least that's how I felt. I think it's a book kind of moved by your passions and your relationships in life, including professional ones. We have Grace Coddington. You write beautifully about her, for example.
Well, people say, is this a retrospective? And I'd say definitely not.
Yeah.
I said, I'm always taking pictures, I'm always making films. I'm always doing things, I feel so lucky that I get to do it. And when I look at this book, I think of the assistants that worked with me and the crew that worked with me. And it's like it's more like a yearbook, I would say, than a retrospective, like a yearbook for like a couple of years. And it's like it is very much about relationships and having relationships in photography, stuff like that. I wanted to make a book that was like maybe going to a party and having all the people that I really enjoyed hanging out with there. And so I thought, like, some days when I get lonely, I can look at this book and think, oh, wow, yeah, that I really was crazy about that guy or that girl, and that dog, or that car in that picture or something like that, That's how the book really happened. So the book's got to come from, at least for me, from a crazy emotional space, a place that's very, like, either laid back or very driven, but come from something else. Talking about your book is so hard for me because I just feel like I just don't want to sell it. I want people to see it, enjoy it. And that's most I can think about it, But I hope it inspires people to go in their own backyard and take pictures of their loved ones. I always say to people, do you photograph your children a lot or your animals? No, not really. And I go, well, you've got to, because nothing's forever. And that's the great thing about photographs. When you see something in a newspaper and you'll see like a house that burned down or there's a hurricane or some kind of disaster, what do people take out of their house but photographs of their family and of their loved ones, And so you think, like when you photograph somebody, you're kind of making a little bit of their history in the world.
And that was the photographer Bruce Weber talking to Fernando Augusto Pacheco. You can hear the full interview on this week's episode of Monocle Radio's weekly dedicated show to print, The Stack, and Weber's book, My Education, is published by Taschen now. You're listening to The Globalist.
There's a craft to every question, which is why at UBS, we query every aspect of the market, working with specialized experts and award-winning research teams, covering over 3,500 stocks in 50 countries, all delivered in a comprehensive library, answering what you want with what you need. UBS, banking is our craft.
It's 14:45 in Taipei, and we head to Taiwan now, where this week 3 people have been charged over the theft of trade secrets from the world's biggest chipmaker, TSMC. Prosecutors claim they passed confidential information to a Japanese competitor, and they're now seeking a combined 30 years in prison. Well, it's the first time Taiwan's National Security Act has been applied in a case like this. And I'm joined now from Singapore by Peter Landers, Asia Business and Finance Editor at the Wall Street Journal. Good afternoon to you, Peter.
Good afternoon.
So briefly tell us what happened.
Right. These 3 people, one of them was the central figure in the case, was a former TSMC employee who moved to Tokyo Electron, the Japanese company that makes manufacturing equipment for semiconductors. And this person allegedly stole information from TSMC and was with the purpose of benefiting Tokyo Electron's development of machines to make 2 nanometer, so-called 2 nanometer semiconductors.
Okay, a 2 nanometer semiconductor. For those of us who aren't absolutely au fait with this, they go into what? Because TSMC makes semiconductors and chips to go in everything, doesn't it? From smartphones to missiles.
Exactly. They have a broad range of products, but some of those most advanced, the 2 nanometer is the most advanced chip available today, and that would go perhaps in a smartphone to make it run faster and more efficiently.
And tell us a little bit more about the fact that the importance of this case. I mean, we mentioned at the start of this the fact that TSMC is the world's biggest chip maker. So to have this sort of shadow come over the company is not good, is it?
Right. TSMC is the alleged victim here of the theft of trade secrets, and it's the national champion. It's a crown jewel of Taiwanese industry. It's the best in the world at making these incredibly fine chips that require manufacturing expertise. And the last thing they want is for other companies to learn their trade secrets. You can't go on the internet and figure out how to make one of these chips. There's a lot of specialized knowledge that only TSMC has. And in this case, what is alleged is that Tokyo Electron is actually one of the big suppliers to TSMC, and perhaps as a supplier, they wanted to learn more about the next generation manufacturing technology so they could more efficiently make machines that would serve TSMC's needs. So that's just an allegation or suspicion at this point, and we have not heard their response yet.
Well, Tokyo Electron says it's sacked staff members which have been involved in I think it's describing incident announced by Taiwanese judicial authorities. But how much damage does this do to TSMC's reputation? Not for the fact that it might, whatever's happened with its staff, but the fact that if it does lose some incredibly important trade secrets, I mean, how much does that weaken its position globally?
My understanding, and we don't really have any details of what secrets were stolen, but based on what limited information we have, it doesn't seem like this is the crown. This is not the crown jewels. It's not like the entire blueprint for everything they do has leaked out to Japan or anything like that. It might have been a relatively small case in the grand scheme of things, but I think they do want to set an example or make an example out of this and say even a small leak of technology is intolerable for us. We have to protect every aspect of our intellectual property because that's all we have.
And indeed, it's not just a sort of a private act, is it? The charges that are being applied to these three individuals are being brought under the National Security Act. This is the first time that this has been used in a kind of case like this.
That's right. The act was strengthened 3 years ago, and it does make it easier for authorities in Taiwan to pursue the theft of trade secrets.
And how do you think international conflicts over such technologies are going to change? What kind of benchmark does this now set?
Well, every country, of course, would love to have the type of manufacturing that TSMC has, and the U.S. has brought TSMC to Arizona to make some chips, although not as advanced as these 2-nanometer chips that we're talking about in Taiwan, but certainly the U.S., Europe, Japan, also with a 2-nanometer effort backed by the government. China is trying to get in the game, although they're far behind. And so every country would like to have the most advanced chip making technology, and that really increases the pressure on TSMC not to let their secrets leak out.
And this is all part of a thing called the Silicon Shield, isn't it?
Right. There is an idea in Taiwan that, of course, is claimed by the communist government in Beijing as part of China to believe that, with the Silicon Shield, so-called Silicon Shield, the incredibly advanced semiconductor manufacturing that takes place in Taiwan today, that might discourage China from trying to invade the island because invasion would simply ruin what makes it great. And hurt everybody's tech industry around the world, since so many companies rely on TSMC chips. So there is that notion that Taiwan can protect itself from invasion or other security threats by maintaining the advantage in chip-making technology that it has today.
Peter Landers, Asia Business and Finance Editor at the Wall Street Journal, joining me on the line from Singapore. Thank you so much for coming on to The Globalist. Finally, let's have an update on the world's culture news. Joining me on the line is Sophie Monaghan-Coombs, Monocle's Associate Editor for Culture. A very good morning to you, Sophie. How are you?
Good morning, Emma. I'm very well, thank you.
Good to have you with us. Let's talk about Netflix. Now, before this item, I have to confess, I realised we were going to be talking about this item, I, like everybody else, tried to log on to Netflix and then failed because I'd forgotten my password. So you're going to have to walk us through it. Tell us, Netflix is doing something to make sure that what you watch is compatible with your star sign.
Yes, it's a new way of recommending things to watch. So if you go to films or series and look at the usual search in the kind of genre section, there is now your Zodiac watch list. So I tested it out. I'm a Scorpio, and it told me... You don't have to respond like that. Everyone does. It told me that Scorpios revel in mystery. So it suggested the new season of Wednesday, Black Doves, the recent popular series with Keira Knightley, the Knives Out films, things like this. Not things that I particularly wanted to watch. And Emma, what's your star sign?
Oh, we're going to do this then. Oh, brilliant. Okay. I'm a Gemini, indeed with Scorpio rising, so I'm with you there. So probably one of the most unpleasant combinations you could wish for.
Well, it tells me that Geminis spill the tea.
Right. What does that mean?
It suggests that you should watch Too Much, the new series by Lena Dunham. There's Dairy Girls, one of the best series of all time, in my opinion. Motherland. There's sort of, I don't know, Gilmore Girls, things like that. Peep Show. You've got a lot of sitcoms. To be honest, what I think about this is that it's obviously a marketing gimmick, but it's so one-dimensional. And, you know, some of them just say like Aries love chaos and competition. So they've got Love is Blind, Selling Sunset, just lots of reality. Cancers will cry if they want to. They've got Gilmore Girls, One Day. They haven't really, I don't know, I think they could have used this opportunity to pull in, you know, Scorpio is obviously a water sign. You could have put in some interesting things that were slightly left field. So I don't think it's very well done, but I think the thing that's interesting about it is that there is so much to choose from on Netflix, and it feels like they're trying to help people have more avenues to pick things because there is so much on there. And to be honest, a lot of it is pretty bad quality. There is a lot of filler on there, and that's not an accident. It's kind of how they operate.
The interesting thing is that when you came up with those suggestions, both for me and the ones that you've been told to do, these are well-known programmes. There is nothing different. There is nothing new or surprising in there that I couldn't have just stumbled across it and my Gemini brain would have been naturally attracted to. Assuming that I do have a so-called Gemini brain.
Assuming that you do like to spill the tea.
Yes, I do.
I completely agree, and I think that's because Netflix does still come out with things that are really popular and that are high quality, but most of the stuff that's on there that you don't know about is just awful. It's, you know, it's poorly made. It's no one's ever heard of it. No critic has sat down and watched it and reviewed it, but it's broken all of these viewing records. And the thing about Netflix is that, you know, it's a technology company, it's not a traditional studio, and it's not concerned with necessarily producing the best types of, you know, kinds of entertainment. What they just want is they want people to view things. They don't necessarily mind about what you think of what you're viewing. So I think one thing that is interesting about Netflix is that their views are calculated by viewing hours. And so if you are watching something and then autoplay comes on and you start watching something that it serves to you and you watch 2 minutes of it, those 2 minutes add into other people's 2 minutes. And once it's accumulated the length of that film, that's a watch, even though everyone's just seen 2 minutes of it. Similarly, if you watch half something, you think it's rubbish, you give up, someone else does that, that's one whole view, even though no one got anywhere near the end. So I think it's quite interesting to think about, you know, how Netflix works, and this Zodiac watch list is this sort of silly gimmick that's quite fun, but I think it reveals that Netflix is, you know, doesn't have the best quality things, and I think people are getting a little bit tired of looking for things.
Sophie, we have a scant minute to talk about a big row in the Netherlands. We began the programme in the Netherlands and we finished there.
Okay, well, this is full circle then. So basically, this is just a row that has actually been rumbling on for 2 years between the government and the Van Gogh Museum. But it's just been made public yesterday. They put out a big press release. And essentially, after Van Gogh died, there was an agreement between his nephew and the Dutch government to keep his entire collection together. And they founded a foundation and a museum to show it. So nothing stayed with the family. It's kind of extraordinary. And it was an enormous amount of works. And in that agreement, the government had to maintain this museum, look after it and resource it. And now it's come to the point where it's been open for about 50 years and it just needs essential maintenance that goes over the amount that the government gives to the museum every year. It's just for things like fixing lifts and sorting out, being compliant with climate legislation, sustainability goals, things like that. And the government have said they won't stump up this extra funding. And so now the museum has made it public and said that this is against the agreement that was made with Van Gogh's nephew back in 1962. So it's come to light, and it's quite interesting to see how the government will respond now that there's been a lot of press, and I assume public pressure will be on its way.
Sophie Monaghan-Coombs, Monocle's Associate Editor for Culture, with me in London. Thank you so much for joining us. Well, that's all the time we have for today's programme. The warmest of thanks to all my guests and to the producers, Laura Kramer, Tom Webb and Anita Riotta. Our researcher was Henry King. Our studio manager was Elliot Greenfield. After the headlines, more music on the way. The briefing's here at midday in London, and The Globalist is back at the same time tomorrow. I hope you can join me for that if you can. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you very much for listening.